On a cold December morning in 1963, 7,000 workers walked through the factory gates of Studebaker Corporation in South Bend, Indiana, just as they had done for decades. They clocked in, picked up their tools, and took their positions along the assembly line. The hammers rang out. The welding torches sparked. The conveyor belts hummed their familiar song. But something felt different that day. The air carried a heaviness that even the loudest machines couldn't drown out. Rumors had been swirling for weeks. Whispers in the break rooms. Worried glances between shifts. Everyone knew the company was struggling, but Studebaker had survived before. They'd come back from bankruptcy in the 1930s. They'd weathered world wars and economic storms. Surely, they would survive again. Then, on December 9th, the South Bend Tribune broke the story. The headline hit like a punch to the gut. Studebaker was closing. The South Bend plant would shut down immediately. After 111 years of building America, the oldest car company in the country was abandoning its home. Workers didn't want to believe it. Some refused to accept the news. One man stood at the factory gates, clutching his newspaper, shouting at reporters. "It's not official yet. It's not official." But it was. And 11 days later, on December 20th, just 5 days before Christmas, the last Studebaker rolled off the assembly line in South Bend. The machines went silent. The lights dimmed, and a century of American dreams came to an end. This is the story of how America's oldest car empire died. A tale of immigrant ambition, industrial triumph, poor decisions, and broken promises. It's the story of a company that helped build the American West, fought in 2 world wars, and designed some of the most beautiful cars ever made. But it's also the story of how even the mightiest empires can crumble when vision fades and mistakes pile up. This is the story of Studebaker, the blacksmith shop that built an empire. Long before the roar of engines and the smell of gasoline, there was the ring of hammer on anvil and the glow of hot iron. The Studebaker story begins not with cars, but with wagons. And it begins not with wealth, but with $68 and a dream. In 1852, 2 young brothers arrived in South Bend, Indiana. Henry Studebaker was 26 years old. His younger brother, Clement, was just 21. They came from Ashland, Ohio, where their father, John Studebaker, had worked as a blacksmith and wagon maker. The family had moved to America from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, part of a wave of German immigrants seeking better lives in the expanding American frontier. Henry and Clement had almost nothing when they reached South Bend. $68, 2 forges, and strong backs willing to work. On February 16, 1852, they opened H&C Studebaker, a blacksmith shop at the corner of Michigan Street and Jefferson Boulevard, in the heart of South Bend. At first, they didn't make wagons. They repaired them. They forged metal parts for other wagon builders. They shoed horses. They did whatever work came through the door. The pay was terrible. Clement once taught school on the side just to make ends meet, earning 50 cents a day. But the brothers had something money couldn't buy. They had a reputation for quality. When a Studebaker repaired your wagon, it stayed repaired. When they forged a piece of metal, it didn't break. Word spread slowly at first, then faster. By 1857, they had built their first complete carriage, a fancy courting buggy with hand-worked iron trim, the kind of vehicle any young couple would be proud to be seen in. That same year, they received a contract that would change everything. The United States Army needed wagons, hundreds of them. The country was expanding westward. Settlers were pushing into new territories. The military needed sturdy, reliable vehicles to supply forts and outposts across the frontier. The Studebaker brothers won the contract, but there was a problem. To meet the demand, they needed to produce wagons faster than ever before. So they developed a special process to quickly age their timber, reducing the time it took to prepare wood without sacrificing strength. It worked. They completed the contract on time. And suddenly, H&C Studebaker wasn't just a blacksmith shop anymore. It was a wagon manufacturing company, and it was growing. The brother who chased gold and found fortune. While Henry and Clement built their business in South Bend, their younger brother John Moeller Studebaker, known as J.M., had other plans. In 1849, gold was discovered in California. Like thousands of others, J.M. heard the call of easy riches. At 19 years old, he left South Bend and headed west to Placerville, California. He didn't find gold. Instead, he found wheelbarrows. While others dug in the dirt chasing dreams of striking it rich, J.M. built and sold wheelbarrows to the miners who needed them. He worked hard. He saved every dollar. And by 1858, he had accumulated $8,000, a fortune for a young man in those days. That's when J.M. made the smartest decision of his life. He didn't chase more gold. He went home. In April 1858, John Moeller Studebaker returned to South Bend with his California fortune and bought out his older brother Henry's share of the business. Henry had grown tired of the work and wanted to farm. He was also deeply religious, a member of the Dunkard Brethren, and uncomfortable with the idea of building military equipment. So Henry sold his portion to J.M. and retired to his newly purchased farm. Now it was Clement and John Moeller running the show, and they were just getting started. Their timing couldn't have been better. The year was 1861. The Civil War had begun, and the Union Army needed wagons, thousands and thousands of wagons. Studebaker supplied them. They built ambulances to carry wounded soldiers. They built supply wagons to haul ammunition and food. They built sturdy, reliable vehicles that could handle rough roads and brutal conditions. The brothers worked around the clock. They expanded their operations. They hired more workers. And when the war ended in 1865, Studebaker had earned a reputation as one of the finest wagon makers in America. But the war did more than just boost their business. It opened their eyes to the scale of what they could become. The wagons that built the American West. After the Civil War, another market emerged, and it was massive. Millions of Americans were moving west. They needed wagons to carry their families, their possessions, and their dreams across prairies, mountains, and deserts. Studebaker wagons became the vehicle of choice for pioneers heading to new territories. They were strong, they were reliable, and they had a reputation that spread from Missouri to California. During the height of westward migration, it's estimated that half of all wagons used by pioneers were Studebakers. The company didn't make all of them. They manufactured about a quarter. But they also supplied metal fittings and parts to other wagon builders across Missouri and beyond. By 1868, annual sales had reached over $350,000. The brothers officially incorporated the business as the Studebaker Brothers Manufacturing Company. A fourth brother, Peter Everst, joined the operation, opening a showroom in Goshen, Indiana. Later, the youngest brother, Jacob Franklin, came aboard as a sales agent. The Studebaker family business had become an empire. They weren't just making wagons anymore. They were shaping the story of America. Every settler who rolled west in a Studebaker wagon carried the family's work with them. Every military campaign supplied by Studebaker vehicles bore the mark of their craftsmanship. And every time someone climbed into a Studebaker buggy to court their sweetheart, they were part of the family's legacy. In 1868, The Studebaker brothers' manufacturing company officially became the world's largest vehicle producer, not just in America, in the world. And they did it by making vehicles pulled by horses. But the world was changing. A new invention was coming, an invention that would transform transportation forever. And Studebaker, unlike most of their competitors, would see it coming in time to survive the transition. Almost. The mansion, the fire, and the turning point. As the company grew, so did the wealth of the Studebaker family. Clement Studebaker, the visionary who had co-founded the business with Henry, became one of the richest men in Indiana. In 1885, he commissioned noted architect Henry Ives Cobb to design a mansion for his family. The home was called Tippecanoe Place, and it was unlike anything South Bend had ever seen. The mansion was built in the Richardson Romanesque style, featuring massive stone walls, a tower, and rooms filled with fine furniture and art. It had 40 rooms, stunning fireplaces, and intricate woodwork throughout. When it was completed in 1888, it stood as a symbol of everything the Studebaker family had achieved: success, power, permanence. But just 1 year later, in 1889, disaster struck. Tippecanoe Place burned completely to the ground. The fire consumed everything: years of memories, priceless possessions, and the physical symbol of Clement's success, all gone in a single night. Most men would have walked away, but Clement Studebaker wasn't most men. He rebuilt. And he rebuilt it bigger, stronger, and more beautiful than before. The new Tippecanoe Place still stands today, now serving as one of South Bend's most popular restaurants. It's a National Historic Landmark, and a reminder that the Studebaker spirit was always about resilience. When they fell, they got back up. When they lost, they rebuilt. That same determination would define the company for the next century. But it wouldn't always be enough. Meanwhile, back at the factory, another fire had struck in 1872. A devastating blaze destroyed over half of the Studebaker plant. Again, the company didn't hesitate. They rebuilt immediately, on a larger scale. By 1874, they had constructed a massive 4-story factory. The business continued to grow, expanding into international markets. Studebaker wagons were sold across Europe, South America, and beyond. The company opened branch houses, what we would call dealerships today, across the United States. The first was in St. Joseph, Missouri, in 1870, positioned perfectly to serve wagon trains heading west. By the turn of the century, Studebaker employed thousands of workers and produced tens of thousands of vehicles each year. They were an industrial giant, but they were still making wagons, and wagons, they were about to learn, had a limited future: the electric dream and the gasoline gamble. In 1900, the world stood on the edge of a transportation revolution. For thousands of years, humans had traveled by foot, by horse, or by wagon. But now, inventors were creating machines that moved on their own. Horseless carriages, automobiles. The question wasn't whether these machines would replace horses. The question was, what kind of engine would power them? 3 technologies competed: steam engines, which required water and time to heat up; electric motors, which were clean and quiet, but required heavy batteries; and gasoline engines, which were loud, smelly, and unpredictable, but offered power and range. Most experts at the time thought electric would win. It was the future. In 1902, Studebaker entered the automobile business with an electric car. The company had been watching the automobile industry carefully. They knew their wagon business wouldn't last forever. Other wagon makers laughed at the idea of automobiles, calling them a passing fad. But the Studebakers saw the truth. Transportation was changing, and if they wanted to survive, they had to change with it. The first Studebaker electric automobile was sold to F.W. Blees of Macon, Missouri. It was clean. It was quiet. It was refined. Everything a Studebaker product should be. But it had one major problem: range. Electric cars could only travel about 30 to 50 miles before needing a recharge, and recharging took hours. For city driving, that was fine. But America was a big country with long distances between towns. Electric cars simply couldn't compete with gasoline on range. By 1904, Studebaker began producing gasoline-powered automobiles as well, sold under the name Studebaker Garford. They partnered with the Garford Company of Elyria, Ohio, which built engines and chassis. Studebaker added bodies and sold the finished vehicles. The partnership worked for a while. Studebaker Garford automobiles were priced between $3,700 and $5,000, expensive even for the wealthy buyers who could afford them. But they were beautifully made, sturdy, reliable. Everything customers had come to expect from the Studebaker name. However, by 1907, problems emerged. Garford wanted to increase production at Studebaker's expense. The partnership grew tense. John Moeller Studebaker, now the company's leader after Clement's death in 1901, enforced a contract clause that put Garford back in line. But the relationship was damaged. In 1911, Studebaker made a bold move. They acquired the Everett Metzger Flanders Company of Detroit, forming the Studebaker Corporation. Now they could build complete automobiles in-house. No more partners. No more compromises. They halted electric vehicle production. Gasoline had won. And in 1912, the first fully Studebaker-manufactured gasoline automobile rolled off the assembly line. The company had successfully transitioned from wagons to cars, something almost no other wagon maker had managed to do. They had survived the change. But new challenges were already forming on the horizon. The man who made it modern and the man who nearly destroyed it. When John Moeller Studebaker died in 1917 at the age of 83, he left behind a company worth $23 million. In today's money, that's roughly $620 million. He had been with the company for 59 years, supervising the manufacturing of nearly every vehicle that left the factory. His death marked the end of the first generation of Studebakers in the business. But who would lead the company next? The answer came in the form of a man named Albert Russell Erskine. Erskine had joined Studebaker as treasurer in 1911 and became president in 1915. He was smart, he was aggressive, and he had big plans. Under Erskine's leadership, Studebaker flourished in the 1920s. He cut prices to boost sales. He invested in progressive labor relations, treating workers better than most companies at the time. He expanded the factory campus, constructing a series of sequentially numbered buildings. The most iconic of these was Building 84. Completed in 1923, Building 84 was designed by Albert Kahn, the legendary Detroit-based industrial architect. Kahn was known as the man who built Detroit, the architect behind factories for Ford, Packard, Hudson, and Chrysler. His designs revolutionized industrial architecture. Building 84 rose 6 stories tall and covered around 800,000 square feet of floor space. Kahn used reinforced concrete instead of wood, creating massive open work areas with enormous windows that flooded the factory with natural light. Workers called it a daylight factory. Instead of dark, cramped spaces lit by dim bulbs, they worked in bright, airy rooms where they could see clearly. It was safer, it was healthier, and it was beautiful. in its own industrial way. By 1920, Studebaker had discontinued all horse-drawn vehicle production and focused entirely on automobiles. They produced sedans, coupes, and light trucks. The company's tagline was simple: always give more than you promise. And for a while, they delivered. In the 1920s, Studebaker was one of America's leading automakers. Their 1920 Studebaker Big Six was a popular and well-regarded vehicle. Their designs were stylish, their engineering was solid, and their reputation for quality remained strong. By 1950, Studebaker was producing almost 500,000 cars and trucks annually and employed 24,000 people in South Bend. The factory campus covered 125 acres. It was a small city within a city, with its own power plant, fire department, and security force. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. Albert Erskine, for all his early success, was about to make decisions that would nearly destroy the company. The Depression, the gamble, and the unbearable ending. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, the entire automobile industry collapsed. Sales plummeted, factories closed, workers lost their jobs by the thousands. Studebaker, like every other company, struggled. But while other automakers hoarded cash and cut costs to survive the storm, Albert Erskine made a different choice. He kept paying high dividends to stockholders. Even as the company bled money, even as sales dropped to almost nothing, Erskine insisted that the Depression was just a temporary hiccup. He refused to believe it was serious. In 1930, in an effort to boost sales, Erskine launched a new line of small, affordable automobiles called the Rockin, named after the famous Notre Dame football coach Knut Rockin. Rockany had been a friend of Erskine's and had agreed to promote the cars at dealership events and auto conventions. It seemed like a brilliant marketing move. But in March 1931, Knut Rockin died in a plane crash. The tragedy shocked the nation, and while Erskine went ahead with the Rockny car line as a tribute, the timing was terrible. The vehicles were well equipped for an inexpensive car, and early sales were promising. But Erskine made a fatal mistake. Instead of concentrating all production in South Bend, where costs were lower, he split production between South Bend and Detroit. Running two factories strained Studebaker's already shaky finances. Meanwhile, competitors like Ford and General Motors were slashing prices in brutal price wars. Studebaker couldn't keep up. By 1933, the company had run out of money. On March 18, 1933, Studebaker entered receivership. It was bankrupt. The company that had survived wars, fires, and a century of economic ups and downs had finally collapsed. Erskine was pushed out of the presidency. The board of directors brought in new management to try to save the company. For Erskine, the shame was unbearable. His job was gone. His Studebaker stock, once worth a fortune, was now worthless. His personal debts were mounting. His health was failing. And on July 1st, 1933, just 4 months after the bankruptcy, Albert Erskine ended his own life. He had bet everything on Studebaker, and when it failed, he couldn't live with the consequences. The news shocked the automotive world. Some blamed him entirely for the company's collapse. Others pointed to the board of directors, who had failed in their oversight. But everyone agreed on one thing. Studebaker's bankruptcy was a tragedy, and Erskine had paid the ultimate price: the comeback, the war, and the golden years. After Erskine's passing, new management took over. Paul G. Hoffman became president, and Harold S. Vance became chairman of the board. Together, they engineered one of the most remarkable turnarounds in American business history. Hoffman and Vance cut costs ruthlessly. They dropped the Rockney brand in July 1933. They sold off unprofitable divisions. They focused on building quality vehicles at competitive prices. And incredibly, within just 2 years, Studebaker emerged from receivership. In January 1935, the newly reorganized Studebaker Corporation was incorporated. The company was back. South Bend celebrated with a massive parade through downtown. Workers marched through the streets, carrying signs that read, "Studebaker is back." Bands played. People cheered. The city's largest employer had survived. Hope returned to South Bend, and for a while it seemed like Studebaker would be just fine. Then came World War II. When America entered the war in 1941, automobile production stopped. Every factory in the country was converted to produce war materials. Studebaker's last civilian automobile, a 1942 President Skyway model, rolled off the line on January 31st, 1942. After that, the factory switched to military production. Studebaker built thousands of army trucks and cargo vehicles for the war effort. They also manufactured 63,789 Wright Cyclone 9-cylinder radial engines for the legendary B-17 Flying Fortress bomber. Each engine had nearly 8,000 finished parts. The work was precise, it was demanding, and it was vital. After the war, Studebaker received the Army-Navy E-Excellence Award for its production efforts. When the war ended in 1945, the company began planning its return to civilian automobile production. In July 1945, they started designing new models, and in 1947, they introduced a revolutionary new car that would change everything. The 1947 Studebaker Champion and Commander models were unlike anything America had seen. They were designed under the direction of Raymond Loewy, one of the most famous industrial designers of the 20th century. Loewy's team, led by chief designer Bob Bourke, created cars that were sleek, modern, and beautiful. They had a light and low look that consumers loved. The front and rear of the car were so similar that people joked you couldn't tell if it was coming or going. The design was bold, it was distinctive, and it made Studebaker a styling leader in the industry. In 1950 and 1951, Studebaker introduced the famous bullet-nose design. The front grille looked like the nose of an airplane or a bullet, pointed and aerodynamic. Motor Trend magazine called the 1951 Studebakers a terrific surprise. In 1953, Studebaker unveiled what many automotive historians consider the best automotive design of the 1950s. The 1953 Starliner and Starlight coupes, designed by Raymond Loewy's studio, with Bob Bourke as chief designer and Bob Cotto contributing key ideas. The 1953 Studebakers were masterpieces. They featured a dropped belt line, substantial C-pillars, a broad glass area, and a low, ground-hugging front end. They looked fast, standing still. They looked like the future. But there was a problem. Studebaker's sales and marketing team made a critical mistake. They built too many sedans and not enough of the beautiful Starliner hardtops and Starlight coupes that people actually wanted. Customers came to showrooms asking for the stunning two-door models, only to be told they weren't available. Sales suffered because of poor planning, not poor design. Still, the early 1950s were Studebaker's golden years. The factory was running at full capacity. Workers had steady jobs. The company was profitable. South Bend thrived, but dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. The independents and the big three squeeze. By the 1950s, the American automobile industry had consolidated. In the 1920s, There had been 44 major automobile manufacturers. By the 1960s, there were only 4: General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, and everyone else. The everyone else were called the independents: Studebaker, Packard, Hudson, Nash, Willys, and Kaiser Frazer. After World War II, the independents held 19% of the automobile market. That was enough to survive. But the big 3, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, had massive advantages. They had bigger factories. They could produce cars more cheaply. They had larger advertising budgets. They had nationwide dealer networks. And they had deeper pockets to weather economic downturns. The independents, by contrast, operated on thinner margins. They couldn't compete on price. They had to compete on style, quality, and innovation. For a while, it worked. But by the 1950s, the big 3 started squeezing harder. They introduced new models. They slashed prices. They launched aggressive marketing campaigns. The independents began to struggle. One by one, they started to fail or merge. In 1954, Studebaker merged with Packard Motor Car Company, another struggling independent, forming the Studebaker-Packard Corporation. It seemed like a smart move. Together, they could share resources, reduce costs, and compete more effectively. But the merger was a disaster. What Packard didn't know when they agreed to the merger, they learned to their horror when accountants finally got into Studebaker's books. Studebaker's break-even point by the mid-1950s was 50,000 or more cars higher than their best-ever annual volume. In other words, Studebaker couldn't make a profit even at full production. A Studebaker designer later revealed that he once priced the 1953 Starliner using General Motors costings. He found that GM could have sold the identical car for $300 less. That was a huge difference. Studebaker's costs were simply too high. Labor costs, in particular, were a major problem. Studebaker employees were better paid than workers at any other automotive company. The company had a strong relationship with the United Auto Workers Union. Workers were loyal. They took pride in their work. But the high wages made it nearly impossible for Studebaker to compete on price. Packard had its own problems, but Studebaker dragged Packard down with it. The merger, instead of saving both companies, ensured that neither would survive. By 1956, James J. Nance, president of Studebaker-Packard, was replaced by Harold E. Churchill. Churchill tried to stabilize the company, but it was too late. In 1959, Studebaker introduced the Lark, a compact car designed to compete with imports and the new compact cars from the Big 3. The Lark was a hit. In 1959, Studebaker-Packard earned a profit exceeding $28 million on sales of 164,000 vehicles. For a brief moment, it looked like the company had found its way back. But in 1960, the Big 3 introduced their own compact cars: the Chevrolet Corvair, the Ford Falcon, and the Plymouth Valiant. Competition exploded. Studebaker's sales dropped to 118,000 units in 1960. Profits shrank to less than $1 million, and even that came from non-automotive divisions. The automobile division was losing money, and it never stopped. The last president and the final betrayal. In 1961, the board of directors hired a new president, Sherwood H. Egbert. He came from the McCulloch Chainsaw Company and had no experience in the automobile industry. But he was aggressive. He was bold, and he promised to save Studebaker. Egbert launched an intense product development program. He restyled the Lark and Hawk models for 1962, and in 1963, he introduced the Avanti, a fiberglass-bodied, high-performance sports car designed by Raymond Loewy. The Avanti was stunning. It was fast. It was futuristic. It looked like nothing else on the road. Automotive journalists loved it, but it wasn't enough. Egbert also intensified the company's diversification efforts. He bought companies in different industries, missile components, floor machines, tractors, trying to make Studebaker less dependent on automobile sales. He dropped Packard from the company name in 1962, officially becoming just Studebaker Corporation. But behind the scenes, Egbert was fighting a losing battle. He was also fighting cancer. In 1963, he underwent major surgery and faced long recovery times. While he was away, the board of directors saw their opportunity. On November 24, 1963, Egbert was replaced as president by Byers A. Burlingame. The official reason was his illness. The real reason was that the board had made a decision. They were getting out of the automobile business. From everything historians have uncovered, Egbert had been hired in 1961 with secret instructions from the board. Get Studebaker out of the automobile business as quickly as legally possible with regards to franchise agreements, and apply $94 million in tax loss credits to merge with other profitable businesses. Egbert had fought against those instructions. He believed in Studebaker. He believed they could survive. But the board had already decided. The end was coming, and the workers, the community, the loyal customers, none of them knew. On December 9, 1963, the South Bend Tribune broke the story. Studebaker was closing the South Bend plant. 17 days after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, another American institution died. 7,000 workers were told they would lose their jobs. The company promised to help them find new employment. But that promise, like so many others, would ring hollow. On December 20th, 1963, just 5 days before Christmas, the last Studebaker automobile rolled off the assembly line in South Bend, Indiana. 111 years after Henry and Clement Studebaker opened a blacksmith shop with $68, the dream was over. Production moved to Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, where a smaller plant would continue building Studebakers until March 1966. But everyone knew the truth. When Studebaker left South Bend, the company was already finished. The rest was just a slow, inevitable fade. The pensions that vanished and the law that changed everything. The closure of the South Bend plant was devastating for the workers, but the worst part wasn't losing their jobs. It was losing their futures. In the months after the plant closed, Studebaker terminated the retirement plan for hourly workers. Thousands of employees who had worked at the company for decades, some for 40 years or more, discovered that their pensions were gone. The plan didn't have enough money to cover the promised benefits. The company had borrowed money from the pension fund to try to keep itself afloat. It was legal at the time. And Studebaker had been fully obligated to repay the money. But when the company collapsed, the money never came back. Retirees received only a fraction of what they were owed. Some got nothing at all. Line workers who had given 40-hour weeks for decades had nothing to show for it. The plight of Studebaker employees became a symbol of the need for pension reform. The United Auto Workers Union, led by President Walter Reuther, seized on the Studebaker shutdown as proof that workers needed protection from default risk. The union devised a proposal for pension reinsurance, a precursor to the termination insurance program that would eventually be created. For years, the UAW pushed for federal legislation, and in 1974, Congress passed the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, known as ERISA. The law introduced management and reporting standards for pension plans. It created vesting rights, ensuring workers would own their pensions after a certain number of years. And it established the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, a government agency that safeguards benefits in case of insolvency. ERISA changed the landscape of retirement security in America, and it was born from the broken promises made to Studebaker workers. The Studebaker shutdown became a policy trigger, a moment in history so painful that it forced the nation to act. But for the workers who lost their pensions, the law came too late, the ghost of Building 84. After the closure, South Bend fell into despair. Studebaker had been the city's identity for over a century. It was the largest employer. It was the heartbeat of the community. When it left, the city felt abandoned. For years, South Bend struggled. People called it a can't-do attitude, a pessimistic mindset that settled over the community like fog. The feeling was, if Studebaker couldn't make it, what hope did anyone else have? The sprawling factory campus, which had once covered 82 acres and employed 24,000 people, sat mostly empty. Some buildings were sold off. Some were repurposed. But many just decayed. For 2 decades, the old Studebaker buildings were slowly demolished. One by one, they came down. The place where cars had been built, where workers had laughed and argued and earned their livings, turned into empty lots and parking spaces. By the early 2000s, almost nothing remained of the original campus, except Building 84. The massive 6-story structure, Albert Kahn's masterpiece, towered over the South Bend skyline like a ghost. Its enormous windows, once flooded with light, stared out over the city like empty eyes. For years, it stood abandoned. Then, slowly, efforts began to save it. Local developers saw potential. The building's reinforced concrete structure was still sound. Its industrial architecture was iconic, and its history was undeniable. In the 2000s, portions of Building 84 were renovated to house new businesses. Purdue Polytechnic University moved in. Purdue Polytechnic High School opened. The South Bend Community School Corporation brought in a career center. The South Bend Elkhart Regional Partnership kept offices there. The South Bend Tribune, the newspaper that had broken the story of Studebaker's closure decades earlier, also moved in. Today, Building 84 stands as a symbol of resilience. It's not what it once was. It will never again house thousands of workers building cars. But it's alive. It's useful. And it's a reminder that even after loss, something new can grow. The cars that collectors love and the legacy that lingers. While Studebakers are no longer being made in South Bend, they are continuously being restored and appreciated by car collectors around the world. Classic car enthusiasts treasure Studebaker models. The 1953 Starliner is considered one of the most beautiful American cars ever designed. The 1963 Avanti remains a cult favorite, with its groundbreaking fiberglass body and timeless style. The Studebaker Hawk series, with its distinctive design and powerful engines, is highly sought after. Even the humble Studebaker Lark, the compact car that briefly saved the company, has its fans. Studebaker owners often say the same thing. Take an old Studebaker, set it beside an old Chevy from the same year, and ask which one looks better. The Studebaker wins hands down. Always. That's what makes the company's failure so tragic. They didn't fail because their products were bad. They failed because of management decisions, high costs, bad timing, and the overwhelming power of the Big Three. In many ways, Studebaker was a victim of consolidation. The American automobile industry simply couldn't support dozens of independent manufacturers. The economies of scale favored the giants, and one by one the independents were crushed. Some historians argue that Studebaker didn't have to fail. In the 1940s, George Mason of Nash proposed building a conglomerate of independents. Studebaker, Packard, Nash, and Hudson working together. If they had listened, if they had merged into a single, powerful, independent company, they might have survived. But they didn't. Pride, egos, and short-sighted thinking got in the way. And so, one by one, they fell. Studebaker closed in 1966. Packard ended in 1958. Hudson and Nash merged into American Motors, which itself was eventually absorbed by Chrysler. By the end of the 20th century, the independents were gone. Only the big three remained, and even they would face crises of their own in the decades to come. But Studebaker's story stands apart, because it was the oldest, because it had transitioned from wagons to cars, because it had survived so much, and because when it finally fell, it fell hard. Taking with it the dreams, the pensions, and the futures of thousands of workers who had believed in the company their entire lives. The father who cried twice. Ron DeWinter grew up surrounded by Studebakers. His father worked at the plant for 35 years. His brother worked there. His brother-in-law worked there. When Ron turned 18, he joined them. It was 1963. He worked at the original pancake house when his father came to him one day. "You're old enough now," his father said. "Come work at Studebaker." Ron did. He walked through the gates of Building 84. He learned the work. He took pride in it, just like his father, but he only worked there for a few months. Because in December 1963, it all ended. Ron remembers his father crying only twice in his life. The first time was when Ron's brother blew the engine on the family's 1953 Studebaker. His father was a quiet man, a proud man, and that car had been special to him. The second time his father cried was when Studebaker closed. Ron watched his father put his head down and weep. For a son, it was one of the hardest things to witness. His father had given 35 years to that company. He had believed in it. He had been loyal, and in the end, it abandoned him. Ron's father carried that pain for the rest of his life, and Ron carries the memory. "It's hard for a son to see his father cry like that," Ron said decades later. "That stays with you. It stays in your bones." For generations, Studebaker had been a constant in South Bend. The company had put countless meals on tables and presents under Christmas trees. Fathers and sons, entire generations, worked at the Studebaker plant. Even years after the closure, former employees referred to it possessively. Working at Studebaker's, as if Studebaker was still there, still handing out paychecks at the end of the week. That's how deep the connection ran. Studebaker wasn't just a company. It was family. The question that haunts history: why did Studebaker fail? That question has been debated for decades. Some blame the big three. General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler were simply too powerful. They could afford to slash prices, outspend on advertising, and undercut the independents until they collapsed. Some blame management. Albert Erskine's refusal to accept the reality of the Great Depression. The disastrous merger with Packard. The board's secret plan to abandon the automobile business. Some blame labor costs. Studebaker workers were paid more than workers at other car companies. The company had strong union relationships, which was admirable, but it made competing on price nearly impossible. Some blame poor planning. Building too many sedans when customers wanted coupes. Splitting production between South Bend and Detroit during the Depression. Failing to invest in new models when the market demanded them. And some blame timing. Studebaker's peak years came in the early 1950s, but by the late 50s, the market had shifted. The Big Three introduced compact cars. Foreign imports began flooding in, and Studebaker, despite the success of the Lark, couldn't keep up. The truth is, it was all of these things. No single mistake killed Studebaker. It was a series of missteps, bad luck, and forces beyond the company's control. But at the heart of it, one fact remains. In the end, it is always management. Good companies can survive bad markets. Good companies can compete with larger rivals. Good companies can adapt to changing conditions, but only if they have good leadership. And Studebaker, for all its history and all its brilliance, didn't have the leadership it needed when it mattered most. The sign that still lives. In 1926, Studebaker established an 800-acre proving ground site to test their automobiles. It was located near South Bend, a massive stretch of land where engineers could push vehicles to their limits, testing durability, speed, and performance. In 1938, they did something extraordinary. They planted 8,259 white pine trees in a specific pattern. From the ground, the trees looked like any other forest, but from the air, they formed letters, the largest living sign in the world. Each letter was over 200 feet wide, 200 feet long, and 60 feet tall. The sign spelled out Studebaker. According to the Guinness Book of World Records, it was the largest living sign ever created. The proving ground is now Bendix Woods County Park. The land has been preserved, and the trees, though older and larger now, still stand. From above, you can still see the letters. Studebaker, a name written in living wood. A reminder that even when empires fall, something can remain. The trees don't know the company is gone. They just keep growing, reaching toward the sky, green and alive, a monument to ambition, to pride, to a company that built America, fought its wars, and designed cars so beautiful people still weep when they see them. The trees stand, and they will stand long after all of us are gone. The museum and the memory. In South Bend today, the Studebaker National Museum keeps the company's legacy alive. The museum, located at 201 South Chapin Street, houses one of the finest collections of historic Studebaker carriages, wagons, and automobiles in the world. You can walk through and see the progression of American transportation. From the simple blacksmith tools used by Henry and Clement in 1852 to the elegant carriages that carried presidents. From the sturdy wagons that crossed the frontier to the sleek automobiles that defined mid-century American style. The museum also preserves the Studebaker archives, thousands of documents, photographs, blueprints, and records that tell the story of the company and the people who built it. School groups visit, families come, car enthusiasts make pilgrimages from around the world, and in those quiet halls, surrounded by the vehicles that once rolled down American streets, you can feel the weight of history. You can imagine the workers who built them, the designers who dreamed them, the families who drove them. And you can ask yourself the same question that has haunted South Bend for 60 years. Could it have been different? Could Studebaker have survived? Or was it always destined to end this way? The museum doesn't answer that question. It just preserves the memory. And that, perhaps, is enough. The lesson in rust and resilience. The story of Studebaker is a story about more than cars. It's a story about the American dream, about immigrants who came with nothing and built empires, about workers who believed in their company and gave it everything they had, about communities that rose and fell with the fortunes of a single employer, and about how even the strongest, oldest, and most respected institutions can collapse when the world changes and leaders fail to adapt. Today, if you drive through South Bend, you'll see a city that has learned to move forward. Mayor Pete Buttigieg famously said in his 2019 presidential campaign, "I ran for mayor in 2011, knowing that nothing like Studebaker would ever come back. But," he added, "I can confidently say South Bend is back." The city has diversified. It has attracted new businesses. It has rebuilt its identity around innovation, education, and resilience. But the shadow of Studebaker still lingers, in the stories told by families whose grandparents worked at the plant, in the cars lovingly restored in garages across the Midwest, in the trees that still spell out the company's name from the sky, and in the knowledge that nothing, no matter how permanent it seems, lasts forever. Studebaker taught America a painful lesson, that loyalty doesn't guarantee security, that promises can be broken, and that when a company fails, it's not just buildings and machines that are lost. It's people, their hopes, their futures, their belief that hard work and faithfulness will be rewarded. Some wounds never fully heal. Some losses are too big to forget. But from the ruins, something else can grow. Not the same thing. Never the same. But something new. South Bend stands. Building 84 stands. The trees stand. And somewhere out there, a 1953 Starliner sits in a garage, polished and perfect, waiting to remind the world that once in a small city in Indiana, a company built cars so beautiful they made people believe in tomorrow. That belief may have been shattered, but the beauty remains. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not the failure, but the fact that they dared to build something great in the first place,